This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, ISIS's How-To Terror Manual. Backed by popular demand, Brad Johnson, a former CIA station chief. Brad, it is always an honor and a privilege to have you on the gang.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It's great to be speaking with you once again.
Thank you, Brad. So look, you're bringing a lot to the table, informing the public, informing Americans of the threat we face, and we're not going to find this anywhere in terms of the establishment media. Brad, tonight let's talk about ISIS's How-To Terror Manual. This is really horrifying stuff. I think the best thing to do for the hook for the show is you told me about a Washington Times article about ISIS. Let's begin with that.
Sure. It came out on the 10th, so just a few days ago, from 2 days ago from today as we're recording this. And what they did is they got a hold of a document that had been published by ISIS. And I don't know if you remember, in one of our very early segments of our first interview, I had mentioned kind of a lot of the fallacy about lone wolf attacks and how they're actually a carefully orchestrated effort on the part of ISIS and Al-Qaeda as well. And I mentioned something about Telegram messaging app and how they have 78 public channels. ISIS does. ISIS alone has 78 public channels on that Telegram messaging app, and many private channels as well, where they use that for their tradecraft, how to communicate with people and so on. And of all things, this article got published through that Telegram app. So your listeners, by the way, are way ahead of the power curve compared to everybody else who's has to read the newspapers and things like that for information. So Telegram app was used, and they published this document, ISIS did, was 66 pages, 174 illustrations, and 7 charts. And that was actually released on July 3rd. So it was done in the Turkish language, although ISIS puts out publications in many, many languages, certainly 25 to 30 languages on a routine basis. And in this particular one, they go into a great deal of detail, once again, on how to kill people and slaughter them and bring up numbers, how to use the press to their advantage. And they even talk about something that's kind of new for our discussions, but that's the use of arson as a terrorist tactic in burning down places. And say, example, one of the scenarios that they go into in quite a little bit of detail is setting a forest fire where there's a forest located or co-located with large residential areas. So they can start a forest fire that will then burn down houses and cause a lot of damage, and absorb our resources to fight those problems and that sort of stuff. And I'll point out, there's been a lot of fires in England, and it's something that they mention as a successful tactic. So I'm now looking back at those fires that they've had in England, the apartment fire where it burnt down and so on. I don't know. I have no inside information. But now it makes me suspicious, and I would go back and look at these fires and see if any of them were actually caused through arson. If they were arsonist-caused fires, then I would be very suspicious of those being terror-related. And that's not something that's discussed anywhere.
But it's discussed on the Glazov Gang, as you said a little earlier.
Yeah, your listeners are better informed than anyone else watching the rest of the media.
These are the kind of discussions I like on my show. Brad, let's just shift for 1 second on a serious note about that, just the disgrace of the establishment media. I mean, look, ISIS comes out with a how-to manual of how to, perpetrate terror and, kill the infidels and everything that they're going to do. And CNN and MSNBC 24 hours a day right now are talking about Donald Trump Jr. meeting with some Russian woman. What do you think of this? Is surreal stuff, isn't it?
It is. I mean, with my background, I made a lot of studies on just a personal basis of how the philosophy works from the left, and it's just that they're on a constant mission. Everything is political, everything is politicized, and they just don't view as important the things that you and I and really kind of normal people would view as important, like threats against our livelihood and lives and all of that sort of stuff. What they view as more important and the priority are their political goals. And so that's why they just constantly report on anything that they can come up with against Bush. And, I didn't start, excuse me, against Trump. I didn't start out as a huge fan of President Trump, but he's the president and he seems to be doing a pretty good job. And his Supreme Court nominee that was added to the court was a great nomination, a great guy. So I'm happy with what I see happening overall. There's things that can be improved, but the left is just unending vitriol and hatred, and anything that they can say that's anti-Trump, they'll do and say, even if it ignores far more important truths like this. The Washington Times is a lone voice in what's mainstream media talking about these sorts of manuals out here. Even though you and I discuss it, it comes up on conservative radio and those sorts of things to some degree, but not to the detail that we've been discussing it here.
Right. Now, Brad, the Times reported that this particular manual that they were referring to was the first of its kind. And you are the expert here who knows that that is absolutely false.
That's correct. And you and I have just touched on some of the publications that ISIS puts out. And I have here volume 9 of Rumiyya, which is, again, that, forgive any bad pronunciation on my part, but that's Arabic for Rome, which is where the apocalyptic final battle is supposed to take place for them to retake control of the world. And in volume 9, which came out, now probably 6 or 8 weeks ago, they went into tremendous detail, far more detail than this Turkish, the Turkish language publication that they put out through Telegram. And they've been doing these sorts of things for years. This is nothing new. It's only new that for people who haven't really been looking closely at it. And this particular volume 9 of Rumiyya goes into tremendous detail on some of this stuff as well. And part of what was used in this Turkish language document is drawn from this previous issue of Rumiyya. And for example, here they talk a lot about using tricks on people, like renting out an apartment or a job where you make applications and come in for interviews, so that they'll set up every half hour or hour or something like that, people coming in to look at the apartment or to interview for the job, and then they kill them. And they have a separate room set aside, and they use the word slaughter, which slaughter very literally from their perspective means to slit the throat. So they're planning on bringing these people, beating them into submission, slit the throats, kill them, of course, through that, and then pile the bodies in a separate room so the next group of people coming in don't see the dead bodies. And they specifically mention things like how to use the press. For example, as they lay it out, they say, keep some hostages, and keep the most pitiful type of hostages that you can have, not because you're going to demand to negotiate anything for the hostages, but in order to increase the suspense of the whole thing and get more press coverage, because the press would be all over a hostage situation where you have dead bodies piled up already. You'd have a police standoff and SWAT teams and all of these things going on. And their goal then would be to increase the drama and press coverage, and then kill the remaining hostages at the end and go out in a blaze of glory against the police. And they go into great detail about how to use the press to their advantage. And they're very, very aware. I mean, they understand the process here in the United States and Canada and Western Europe and so on. And they want to use it just brutally to their advantage as best they can.
This is such scary stuff, Brad. And when you refer that, I don't think I'm going to be scared trying to rent a new apartment anywhere, but when they say, they're going to bring them in and then, cut their head off, behead them, or however they're going to do it, do you think this might have something to do with Surah 47:4 that commands to smite them at their necks? Or does it have something to do with these people being probably maybe unemployed and being affected by climate change?
Well, I've often heard people make the argument that State Department people and so on often make the argument that these people need to have a job, they need to have health insurance, they need to have all of these sorts of things so that they won't be interested in terrorism. But let me point out an example of why that's just so absolutely ridiculous. It's just not based on any sort of reality. It's very common for the terrorist organizations, the ISIS fighters and so on, when they're wounded, not fatally wounded, just wounded, to refuse treatment, to allow themselves to bleed out and die so that they can go to heaven as a martyr, having fought in the cause. So it's very common on their recruitment films and so on and things that they put out to show pictures of these dead guys laying there having bled out with a big smile on their face, now dead at the point of the photograph. And look at the degree of their dedication. They're willing to refuse treatment, to refuse medical treatment in order to bleed out on purpose from wounds received fighting so that they can die and go to heaven. Yeah. Now, tell me that you can convince a guy like that to stop fighting because you're going to give him a great job at Kmart or something, or at a doctor's office or building construction or whatever. It's just not going to work. I mean, he's refusing treatment. A hospital is not going to make any difference to that guy.
Yeah, Brad, I would just, say quickly, we both know very well that it's crucial for the left to separate Islam from Islamic terrorism and to take the Islam out of Islamic terrorism. And jihad denial is what they perpetrate 24/7. But we know that a huge percentage of the leadership of terrorist organizations, of the members of terror organizations, are all Western educated. They come from very wealthy backgrounds, and it's just absurd. And we also know many people that suffer in poverty. I mean, look at Haiti and all the poverty there. When was the last time a Haitian blew himself up among innocent people? It's not mathematics 101 what the left tries to argue here.
No, that's correct. I mean, almost nothing that they argue is based on fact. It's mostly all based on what they want or what they would like to have be true versus what is true, and that does need to be carefully separated out, and the press should be responsible for checking people to make sure they report the truth to the press rather than them creating these stories that are false themselves. But we're in a world right now that's just upside down for these sorts of things.
And Brad, that is why you've shared with us why you're a retired CIA station chief, but you've come back to enter the battle because you're very concerned and you see all this denial, you see the catastrophe. So let's end with this. I know that a lot you cannot discuss, but as a former CIA station chief and the knowledge you have and perspective you have, how do we conclude on this how-to terror manual and the other manuals that ISIS is putting out, and the absolute lack of coverage in our establishment media on these manuals coming out?
Yeah, Jamie, extremely important. I think there's a tendency among a lot of people to downplay a lot of the threats because they think that that these threats that exist out there are something that's going to create panic among the people. And so you have well-meaning people, a lot of people in law enforcement and so on, that don't like to go into great details because of just not wanting to create a sense of panic. Well, I disagree with that. I think, I understand their argument, and I just respectfully disagree with them that I think the people will not panic, and I think more information out in the public realm is better. There are also then those on the press that it's not to their political advantage to have all of the threats be publicized. So you have a combination of factors out there and a combination of factions that just don't allow this type of reporting to be mainstream. Also, too, a very important point on this is there's been previous editions of Rumia and other magazines and so on where they talk about the different ways to do attacks and so on. And there's been a lot of publications over the last year where they talk about using trucks, for example, and we've seen trucks used a great deal over the last year. Prior to that, they talked a lot about attacks on airports and airplanes and attacking their computer systems and so on to screw up the flight system and so on. And a year or so ago, a year and a half ago, we saw a lot of those sorts of attacks as well. So, I mean, there's a consistent pattern of them evolving and changing the type of threat, and then those threats being played out. So I think this is very real, and people need to be made aware. And if it saves one life, then it's worth it. And I just simply do not believe that the population is going to panic.
This is really, really frightening, scary stuff. And our establishment media, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is talking about a few Russian people that Trump walked by in a room somewhere. Just really surreal times. Brad Johnson, thank you so much for staying on top of all this, for fighting for America and for freedom, and for keeping us informed.
Jamie, it's my pleasure as always. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Brad. And to our audience, if you like what we do and support what we do, please go to jamieglazov.com and support the show, because we're a fan-generated program. And the least you can do is make sure you are a subscriber to the YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang. And please tell other people to be subscribers as well. We'll see you soon. Good night.